So hi guys, my name is Patrick McCorry. We've already been introduced. I think every speaker should have an opportunity just to reintroduce themselves. So I'll just go from this order here.
Okay. Hello, my name is Anais Urlich. I am the head of research at Eden Block Ventures. So we are an investment and research fund and currently involved with a variety of projects, including ChainSpace, where Mustafa is part of. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm a PhD student. My name is Mustafa, by the way. I'm a PhD student at UCL in London and co-founder at ChainSpace, which they're an investor in. And I'm interested in sharding and on-chain scaling and how to shard verification.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, I'm Greg Scullard, lead developer advocate for Hedera Hashgraph, and we're deploying a public network which is fast, fair, and secure. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Mingchao. You can just call me Fisher. I am a staff engineer at Dolby Laboratories, so I'm in charge of the research and innovation in distributed and decentralized content creation and delivery. Thank you.
Awesome. So guys, for anyone in the room who wasn't aware, the very first edition of this workshop was actually about off-chain and layer 2 protocols. So the whole point of a layer 2, actually who was at off-chain? Raise your hand if you were there. Some people, okay, this is actually a different audience then, that's even better. Okay, so the whole point of layer 2 is simply to reduce the load on the blockchain. So instead of sending every transaction to the network, you just send the start and the end, and that's it. Now, that's because these blockchains don't scale. Now the question is, as we've seen over the past 2 days, a lot of these new blockchain and sharding protocols, they propose that they can do 5,000 transactions per second. If you can do that TPS, then was the whole previous workshop a waste of time? You know, do we actually need layer 2? So I'll point at the Mustafa, because I see that smile on your face.
Wait, sorry, which protocol did you say was
is it layer 2?
Oh, okay.
I mean, so was layer 2 a waste of time?
So you're saying, do we need layer 1 if layer 2 could do 1 billion transactions? Is that
No. If layer 1 can do 5,000 transactions per second, do we actually still need layer 2? I mean, do we really need to play Battleship off-chain if we can play it on-chain?
Well, 5,000 transactions per second isn't enough, is it? So we do need layer 2. And even if we did do 1 million transactions per second on layer 1, we still need layer 2, because at the end of the day, no matter how you scale on layer 1, whether you're sharding or bigger blocks, and even if you have fraud proofs, it's still fundamentally on layer 1, you've got a trade-off between decentralization and throughput. And ultimately, sure, there's ways to reduce that, for example, by sharding verification, like fraud proofs, but ultimately, this trade-off still exists, and if you take that to an extreme, then you're going to have very little decentralization. So you do need layer 2 scaling, but you do also need layer 1 scaling to support layer 2.
Awesome. Any other comments or? Oh.
So no, we don't. Not with Hashgraph. I guess for the technologies that have been built at layer 1 that have inherent limitations, and I was going to ask a question, maybe it's a naive question, but why are we trying to scale Bitcoin? I thought the point of Bitcoin was that it gets slower over time, and that was its value in some respects. So, but that aside, so we can run 100,000 cryptocurrency transactions per second. So initially, we don't see a need for layer 2 scaling.
But under what network assumptions?
ABFT assumptions.
Yeah, but how much megabits per second do you need to run 100,000 transactions per second?
Sure. So there's a trade-off there in terms of network performance, but we can shard if we need greater than that. But like I said earlier, technologies that are inherently maybe more bottlenecked at the layer 1 potentially needs layer 2 technologies to help them scale. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or points?
Okay, so me. I believe it's a combination between the two, layer 2 and layer 1 solutions. And inherently, I don't think they focus on the same problem. Even though they both aim to scale the blockchain, they don't focus on the same problem, and they don't have the same problems in their implementation. So what we can see here, we struggle, for example, with consistency issues between shards. Whereas if you have, for example, a plasma solution, you wouldn't necessarily struggle with consistency issues because it would mostly involve players whom you already know. So in that sense, you would struggle with different issues, and those have to be addressed differently. But at the same time, I believe that layer 2 solutions are at the moment more feasible to deploy on a smaller scale, but ultimately to scale on a big scale and to enhance usability on a wider range, we will need layer 1 solutions.
Yeah, and do you have any points? Or?
So I don't know too much about layer 2, but my comment would be I don't think 5,000 transactions per second would be enough to, it's the end of our goal. Yeah. So I think in the future, if we look forward, if we implement blockchain for things like Internet of Things, that we might have need like millions of transactions per second, perhaps. So yeah. So I think there are still work to do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess from my best opinion as well, so I do layer 2 research. So what's really nice about layer 2 is that we can run an application without ever talking to the network. So you don't really care about network latency at all in terms of like the wider global network. You just care about latency with your peer. So that's one advantage, it's actually much faster for applications.
I also wanted to say that I think it's not meaningful to talk about purely about transactions per second, because like theoretically speaking, like Bitcoin today, if you just remove the block size limit, it could scale to 1 billion transactions per second. Yeah. If you have a terabit internet, if you assume the full nodes have terabit internet connections. The question is what network resources do you assume the nodes have, and what kind of decentralization and security guarantees do you have?
Yeah, you're getting to my later questions.
Sorry?
You're getting to my later questions.
Oh, cool.
I've got one other question since we have a VC here now, like an investor. So I went, like, a few weeks ago, I went to this dinner in London, and I didn't actually realize they're all like hedge funds, and they were telling me it's basically this year is the year of consensus protocols. All investments are in consensus protocols. So actually, as an investor, what are you more interested in? Like new consensus protocols, new blockchain protocols, or layer 2?
Well, it depends, which is obviously the answer for many questions. But I wouldn't say that, at least us at Edenblock, we are not interested in one over the other. We are interested in the connection between multiple solutions, and we wouldn't focus solely on consensus protocols, because they are just also means to an end. So what we focus on, for example, right now is also usability. We have a bunch of blockchain applications, right? Yeah. And we try to optimize those, but at the same time, most use cases won't be possible because we either don't have the technical solutions or because there is just no network effect happening which are required for those solutions. Yeah. So ultimately, we focus on usability as well, which is probably on the other end. Yeah.
I think that's really important. In fact, one of the cheeky comments I've been giving all week is that as a community, we probably focus too much on infrastructure and not enough use cases. Do you guys agree with that, actually? Are we focusing too much on infrastructure and not enough about usability?
I think there's plenty of use cases. It's just that the infrastructure doesn't support it, right?
Yeah. Any other comments or?
Well, I guess adoption at the end of the day will depend on use cases. We can come up with the best technology in the world, but unless it has a use, so unless there is a problem to solve with our solutions, then there's nothing to do, right?
Okay. Anything else, or? You're all happy?
Yeah, I think I'll just agree with you guys.
Okay. Well, one thing I'm going to mention as well, so this is sort of gets into the new blockchain and consensus protocol world. So what's really cool about Nakamoto consensus and Bitcoin is the very low overhead. I receive a block, I hash it, I look at the puzzle, I say, yep, that's a valid block, and then I accept it. But as everyone here has seen, for new sharding protocols and for new blockchain protocols, there's a significant more overhead. They actually realize if a block is valid. So, for example, we could think of like OmniLedger, for example, and we look at the committees and we say, why is this person in a committee? To do that, you have to validate the transcript to say, okay, there was this random beacon, they did the shuffle, whatever, and now he's in the committee. So that's a significant overhead for these new protocols. So my question is, if we have this overhead, is that going to have like practical implications in terms of real-world use?
So what kind of overhead are you talking about? Do you mean like?
So it's like storage, bandwidth. You've got to send this protocol
You mean
transcript
communication
over.
overhead?
Yeah, communication, storage, block size. I mean, even as a community, like over the past years, in the Bitcoin world, they argued about 1 megabyte block, 2 megabyte blocks. But actually, if some of these protocols are, deployed, it could be like 10 megabytes just to do the consensus protocol. So is this going to have implications for us?
Do you mean? Are you talking about, like, for example, the messaging complexity in BFT?
It could
Or
be.
like,
That'd be one aspect. Or just even as an external observer, I download the block and I have to convince myself why this block is valid. So the overhead there is a bit more in terms of the protocol transcript.
But why is that bigger in sharding, in your opinion?
I mean, if you think about sharding, I join a shard, there's these committee members, and they're being reshuffled from time to time. I have to see why they're being reshuffled. So I should probably validate that.
Yeah. I think it depends on, like, for example, in theory, you don't have to have a lot of that overhead. Like, if you look at a lot of sharding protocols, the consensus algorithms use consensus algorithms with higher overheads. Like BFT has a higher overhead than Nakamoto consensus. Like Nakamoto consensus has 0.1 message complexity for you to convince yourself that a block is part of the consensus. But with PBFT, for example, which is what systems like OmniLedger or Chainspace use, there's ON message complexity to convince yourself that a message is valid. But in theory, you could just replace that with Nakamoto consensus. But the reason why some of these systems use consensus protocols with higher overhead is to get faster finality. Mm-hmm. And in systems like sharding, that's essential, because if you have one shard that has a fork or has a reorganization, then potentially every other shard has to have a reorganization as well. So you have this cascading effect that you want to minimize. But I don't necessarily think that overhead has to exist. Like, if you look at systems like Casper FFG, it achieves finality without that overhead. So I'm not necessarily sure that overhead is inherent to sharding, and I think there's ways to avoid that. Like, one of the overheads could potentially, for example, be having to have lots of signatures on the block, for example, but that could be avoided with schemes like BLS signatures.
Yeah, I guess I'm more of an engineer, and I look at it as a trade-off. If there's a benefit to the overheads, and that benefit is positive, then is it such an issue?
Yeah, I guess that's the price we pay for a trustless system. So you have to pay for it. The problem is how to minimize it.
Yeah. I think even though you do might have an overhead, it's still the case that if you use sharding, it's linear scalability. So I think the fact that the scalability is linear kind of overshadows the fact that it has higher overhead. Because ultimately you still get higher scalability even though the overhead might be higher. Yep.
Okay, I can move on to another question as well. So there's two categories of consensus protocols. You have like fork avoidance protocols, which is pretty much like BPFT. We avoid forks like the plague. We should never fork. That should never happen. Nakamoto consensus was the first protocol really to tolerate forks. If there's a fork, we get eventual consistency, and we sort of just eventually agree. What do you guys think are the trade-offs there compared to having this eventual consistency versus instant finality? Because actually what's happening now is that, as you mentioned with sharding, we're now moving back to the instant finality world. And even with stuff like Thunderella, what you have is instant finality at the top, but eventual consistency is the lower layer. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
So I guess it depends on what you need your consensus finality for. If you're we often use I go to a bar and I buy a beer with some token, or I go and buy a coffee in a coffee shop. If the coffee shop owner wants to know that you're actually paying for something, it needs to be pretty instant, right? We have that guarantee today with many fiat payment systems such as Visa and so on. So in those use cases, I guess you need that instant finality. You need to know that this can't be reversed. This can never change. And in other cases, then maybe waiting a few hours or a few minutes, or trusting that X% finality is a good enough risk to take. in some use cases may be perfectly okay. So I mean, Lehman, our CTO and chief scientist, is a mathematician, and anything other than 100% is just not good enough. So as far as he's concerned, it's 100% finality or nothing. 99% still has, or even 99.9% still has a risk of being undone, however difficult that is. So I have to favor 100%. Okay. But I guess it, again, depends on use cases.
Yep.
Horses for courses.
Any other comments or?
I mean, I think sometimes like the desire for instant finality is overrated. Like, I don't really think. I think I'm sometimes misplaced. Like, okay, like if the argument is because you need to make sure that your payment is accepted straight away, I don't think that's a strong argument for having instant finality, because, like, in theory, I mean, in Bitcoin right now, like a lot of people make this argument, like, oh yeah, you have to wait 6 confirmations for to wait for to buy a coffee or something like that. But at the end of the day, you don't need any confirmations at all to buy a coffee, because it's so low risk that you don't need, that a double spend attack is unlikely. But in some cases, you do need instant finality, like when it comes to sharding. But like in theory, like Bitcoin, I mean, the committed consensus does, in my opinion, has similar finality guarantees to traditional consensus protocols. It just takes longer to achieve that finality. So it's not that a lot of people say like the committed consensus has no finality, but it actually has the same kind of level of finality as BFT protocols. It just takes longer to get there because you need to wait a bunch of blocks. And that's why sometimes you do need that instant finality. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
So I would agree it depends on the use case.
Yeah.
Like I also believe that if it's a small transaction, or depending on the transaction you make, right? Depending on the use case. If it's financial transaction, then obviously finality is more welcome than partial finality. But at the same time, obviously, as systems become more complex, you would want to have instant finality, because just partial finality would probably make sharding, etc., more complicated.
Yep.
I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else or okay? Okay. So another question before I move on to the audience and let them have a turn at grilling you guys. So normally we live in our own little bubble, and we all love our own protocols. But if you had to name another protocol that you really liked, what would it be? And potentially, what reason? Why do you like it?
What would I call the protocol?
Another protocol that you're not involved in. So maybe like I could say I like chain space because I'm not involved in it, for example. Yeah. So I'll give you guys a second to think about it.
I'll tell you right away.
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Okay, well that's cheating. Like
we wouldn't be here without it.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Nakamoto consensus is underrated.
Okay, let me rephrase this question. A protocol that's not built yet or being built. You can go first if you want, because you're in the world of investing. You're not allowed to say chain space. Conflict of interest.
No, chain space. I mean, they're one of our favorites, but I would say there's a protocol called TODA protocol, and
TOTLE.
TODA.
Oh, DA. Okay.
And what they are doing is pretty interesting as well. So they are currently being built. They are not built yet. It's basically a huge binary tree, as described before as well, where you can store any information you want. And the consensus works different. It works basically up the tree rather than as a DAG.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. You can go next, Mustafa.
I'm kind of looking forward to see how Plasma plays out, because I think it's such like a complicated protocol. If you implement it fully, like when you try to implement like mass withdrawals and mass exits, it's kind of like sharding but non-uniform. So I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Be curious to see how EOS and Ethereum play out over the next few years.
Yeah. I mean, I think EOS is actually quite. I'm sorry, I'm just interrupting now. I think EOS is quite interesting in the world. I mean, apart from all the drama that's associated with it. I mean, if you look at like classical consensus, there's no incentives at all. You know, you just hire these nodes and they do the job for you. Then you get Nakamoto consensus, and this is more like a free market in the sense that I buy hardware, you buy hardware, and now we just compete and we try to outdo each other. But then you have this DPOS, which is more like a democracy or government, like liquid democracy. I elect people and then they vote on my behalf. And as we've seen, that comes with lots of problems that are always associated with democracy. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite an interesting, if it works. I guess.
Yes, I think my favorite, apart from our own polyshard, is OmniLedger.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first glance when I look at the paper, I feel it's a very clean design. Yeah, and also its different components. It's also interesting, such as the random haunt thing. So I think OmniLedger is my favorite.
Okay, that's awesome then. Is Eleftherios here? Do you want to jump up, Eleftherios, by the way? We can get you one more seat. Yeah. Go. Grab him a seat. Grab him a seat. I want to get Eleftherios up here. Yeah. Okay, so we'll start taking questions from the audience after we get that chair. Awesome. Come on up, Eleftherios. Yep. So I can ask you the same question. What's your favorite protocol except for OmniLedger? Oh.
Yeah, so I think I really like what they do at UCL, like with George, both like chain space and the Blockmania was very interesting of like how they get a reliable broadcast primitive that's simpler than consensus and then play around a bit and you magically get consensus after it, and I found it very interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I can move on to the audience. Does the audience have any questions? I'm sure, yep, there you go.
I have been haunted by this question since I got this invitation of coming here. What exactly is layer 1 and what exactly is layer 2?
Oh, well, I was at a Dagstool last week and we had this whole argument about it. Layer 1's actually several layers. I'll let you guys answer though. I don't want to jump in the panel. Who would like to take this?
Well, philosophically, I think it's a bit of a philosophical question. Like, I think the way I see, I mean, the way that many people see it, and what I'm going to say is not original, but like, they kind of like if you imagine the blockchain as a kind of like a decentralized court system, so like it's kind of like a verifiable international court system. Everyone sees the result, and it's like the idea is, well, you don't need every single transaction to be verified or go through a court, right? So you just need disputes to go through the court. So the idea of layer 2 is that you just, if you have a mutual contract with someone, you just sort that out between yourselves, and only if there's a dispute, you go to the main chain, i.e. the court. Sorry, I guess that's quite a...
Very quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Then why sharding is considered as layer 1?
I think Eleftherios has a good answer to this.
Yeah, so
We had a
to
drunk-
answer, like, I agree that sharding could be like layer 1.5, let's say.
I think...
Like for me, layer 1 would be a global state, right? Everyone sees it, everyone validates it. And then you have layer 2, where it's a very specific substate that you get 3 nodes, whoever cares about it, and they validate that. And then you have sharding, which is kind of in between. Like not everyone sees it, but it's actually still secure by design and still public. So it's somewhere in between for me.
Yeah.
So I think, I would see sharding as layer 1. The reason for sharding being layer 1 is because every single node needs to be sure in some way or another that the on-chain state of every shard is valid, whether that be directly by verifying it themselves or indirectly through fraud proofs. They need some assurances that the on-chain data is valid. Otherwise, the whole state of the system becomes corrupted. I think what is more like layer 1.5 is systems like Plasma. So like the idea of Plasma is that it's kind of like sharding / side chains, but it's like anyone can create their own sidechain that feeds back into the main chain, but only the participants in that sidechain have to actually care about that sidechain. So it's kind of a mix between layer 1 and 2 anyway, because not everyone has to verify the state of every sidechain. But straight sharding is layer 1 because everyone cares about the validity of the state.
If I may ask the last question then. Then you think that the difference between layer 1 and layer 2 is the security then? So basically, if you think it is as secure as it is on-chain, then it should be layer 1. Otherwise, if it is rely on some other assumptions.
I don't think it's that.
No, yeah.
The way I normally envision layer 1 is that layer 1 is a consensus protocol. If it breaks down, tough luck. Game over.
No, but you can have consensus
Yeah.
protocols in Plasma as well, no?
No, well, yeah, exactly. So layer 2 is another consensus protocol. And if this breaks down, it has this root of trust, this highly reliable underlying blockchain that will always back it up. So in Plasma, if the operator disappears, we always get our coins out. If it's a state channel and we're playing like Battleship or chess, the channel breaks down, we just go back down to the base consensus layer. So there's 2 consensus layers going on. The one's is a very small subset.
So then what divides layer 1 and layer 2 is that's whether invalid transaction will break the whole system.
But not invalid, it's just the consensus protocol breaks down.
Okay.
Maybe you hit the security threshold. I mean, we all have different opinions. That's how I see it. And actually trying to get a consensus on that would be quite useful.
I also don't know. I just want someone.
Yeah.
What the opinion.
Excellent. Was there a question here?
Just to add on the clarification between L1 and L2. So if it depends on its own mechanisms for maintaining security, liveness, safety, whatever, it's layer 1. If anything that happens, if your system is compromised for whatever reason, and to resolve your disputes you need to go to another chain or something, that's layer 2. And this is like what happens with Plasma or channels. But sidechains are not layer 2 in my dictionary.
I would say non-custodial sidechains.
Yes, that's what Plasma is. But for sidechains, for example, they're not layer 2 in my opinion, because if the sidechain consensus is compromised, the sidechain is done.
So you think it's layer 1?
Yes, I consider sidechains to be like, there's no like layer 1 and 2, they're on the same layer, and they just are for interoperability.
Well, depends how they are structured, no?
There's no start, they're on the same level, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't think they're entirely on the same level because not everyone who's validating the main chain needs to care
Yes.
about the side chains.
Yes.
I think what he means is that something like RSK or Liquid, if the federation's corrupt or the consensus protocol breaks down, your coins are stuck. There's no way to return back to layer 1.
Mm-hmm.
No, but in Plasma, you don't.
No,
even-
Plasma's non-custodial. Exactly.
right.
That's the distinction. So custodial sidechains and non-custodial sidechains.
So it depends, right?
Yeah, it depends on the security requirement.
Yeah, but
Layer
what
2.
I'm saying is that there's a different security model in the Plasma versus sidechains.
But I don't think it's the security model that necessarily makes it layer 1 or 2. Like Plasma, from the main chain, Plasma looks like a custodial sidechain from a technical perspective, but it just has higher security than a custodial sidechain because of the ability to do a mass exit
Okay.
if there's no liveness, in my opinion. Yeah.
That is accurate.
Sorry?
That is accurate.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Excellent. Roman, did you have a question?
Maybe even not a question, maybe join to discussion a little bit, if you don't mind. So today I heard, yesterday and today I heard that several people mentioned finality of Ethereum Casper. It's a very convenient marketing term, but it's not finality in the meaning of BFT protocols like PBFT, if you're speaking about a leader-based protocol, or about Honey Badger or Hashgraph. These protocols really provide finality, but Ethereum Casper provides finality only in terms of honest 2/3 of participated stake. So, for example, if we have 1% of locked stake for the validators and 2/3 of them, so less than 1%, is honest, then we really have finality. But if we can involve another 3% of the whole stake of Ethereum and to participate as the validators, there are no finality at all. So there are some different.
Casper's more like economic finality in the sense that you have the compromise, you're saying 2/3 or 1/3 of the coins, the reverse history. So it's economic in that sense. You're only going to do it if you don't want to lose the money.
Yes, but we need to understand that it's not for full stake, but for some small portion of stakes that it's currently locked. So it was interesting discussion between Vitalik Buterin on Reddit, and it was explained in details. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other comments on that? Okay.
Excellent. Were there any further questions from the audience for the panel? If not, then I'd just like to thank you all. That was really, really fun to watch. And let's have a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
In particular, Anais for stepping up. That was very brave of you. So thank you. Thank you, Patrick, as well. So that's it for our event. In closing, I just wanted to thank all of our speakers across the 2 days. I think we've had some really interesting talks. It's been great to hear from academics who are doing the cutting edge research to get an idea of the state of these scaling proposals and what we might be looking at in the near future. I'd also like to thank the audience. We've had some really good discussions. We've had some challenging questions, and it's been really fun to see practitioners and other enthusiasts respond to the presentations of our academics. So thank you all for joining us. Finally, I'd like to thank Binary District and Research Institute for organizing this excellent event. I've got more good news. There is another master workshop coming up. It's going to be in London. It's in May, and it's going to cover zero knowledge proofs. So I'm very excited about attending that as well. Yeah, that's all I have to say. We've set a high bar for the event in London, so be sure to come to that. And speaking of bars, I think we all deserve a drink. So let's have a final round of applause, and thank you all very much.